Welcome to AEDT 4120, Serious Gaming and Simulations. Week 6, Serious Games Design, video clip 1 of 4. I'm Professor Bill Kapralos, and over the next few minutes, we'll be discussing designing games as learning tools. And this is part 1 of 4. However, prior to doing so, here's the list of analysis questions for this particular video clip. Number 1, what is the ultimate quest of serious games design? Number 2, what is the difficulty in designing a serious game, in contrast to an entertainment game, or that is, a game that's made specifically for entertainment purposes? Number 3, what are the 2 prime directives of a serious game designer? And finally, number 4, how do we overcome the issues and difficulties associated with serious game design? Let's begin our discussion on designing games as learning tools with an interesting quote from Ashley Lipson. Open quote, "To be an entertaining and educational game, first it must be a game, and only then a teacher." End quote. Ashley Lipson was the creator of the legal game called Objection back in 1994. Objection is a courtroom simulation game that focuses on the trial and what you, the player taking on the role as the defendant's lawyer, should respond to when the prosecutor questions a witness. Objection itself was quite groundbreaking in its time, and I recommend you take a look at the YouTube video that outlines some of its gameplay. So is it possible to take the engagement of a video game and the learning that takes place when one plays the game and design a video game that produces reliable learning of academic or training material? This was in fact the ultimate quest of many educators since the introduction of video games, peaking in the late 1970s and early 1980s during the edutainment era, where we saw how it was thought all instruction could be placed inside of a video game and that would solve all our educational problems. However, as we saw, the learning games that were developed during the edutainment era were generally not real games at all, at least not in the commercial sense, and they were essentially short multimedia pieces. According to one game designer, referring to the games developed during the edutainment era, open quote, "The instructional designers brought into the creation of a learning game because they supposedly know how to get people to learn, typically suck the fun out of any game they get their hands on." Close quote. So there's many issues with learning games, and it generally all leads back to the lack of gameplay. By gameplay, of course, we saw in a previous video clip, we're referring to the fun things the player gets to decide, control, and do. Why is it difficult to design serious games or learning games? So it is definitely possible to combine the fun of a real game with the educational content, and there's many examples where this is done successfully. But this is very hard to do, and there are far more examples where it's done incorrectly. Designers of a new entertainment game start with a blank slate and a single goal, and that is, make something that will engage players for as much time as possible, whether it's 30, 60, 100, or more hours. The game designers invent all the content of the game, the worlds, the characters, the puzzles, the quests, amongst others, to help the player reach their final goal of the game. And in the design process, any element or idea can be accepted into the game if it furthers engagement. In other words, the game designers that are working on an entertainment game have much flexibility and there's plenty of leeway, provided they make a fun and engaging experience. At the end of the process, the game designers write a book, often done by the publisher, about the game's content to help the players understand the world in the game and succeed in it. In other words, they write a manual. Now, on the other hand, designers of serious games, the book of content already exists before the designer starts, and the game has to somehow be about that book. In other words, the game designer has no say in the content. And the designer has 2 prime directives to follow simultaneously. They have to make the game engaging, but at the same time, they also have to follow the book. In other words, they have to be accurate and follow the content. Designers of serious games can't simply jiggle a concept here and add a fact there. They're bound by the book of content. Furthermore, to complicate matters, designers of educational games or serious games have to think about the game's effectiveness as well. Does the game cause people to learn? Because ultimately, if the game does not cause people to learn, then the game is ineffective and it will not be used. How do we deal with these three issues? How do we make a game fun and engaging? How do we make a game that follows the book of content and at the same time causes people to learn? In other words, the game is effective. The answer to this is quite simple. It's gameplay. And gameplay makes the difference between good and bad games and great games. Further complicating matters, players still expect great graphics, sound, storyline, etc. But there's many examples, as we previously saw, of failed pretty games. There's many good games with poor graphics thanks to good gameplay. And what comes to mind here is the Nintendo Wii. When we look at the Nintendo Wii games, they're certainly not high fidelity graphics, yet they're very fun, they're engaging, and people can spend hours on top of hours playing them. So how do we, as serious game designers, design serious games that don't suck? It challenges serious games designers to take any material that is the starting point and design a series of great gameplay experiences to get it across. The designed games will involve graphics, sounds, characters, story, etc., but it's what gameplay has those characters do. And more importantly, it's what gameplay has the player to do. Designing an effective serious game ultimately comes back to gameplay.